I remember the sound before I remember the pain. Leather moving through air. A sharp inhale from somewhere behind me. Then the crack. Not a slap, not a cut, a split. Like something tearing open that was never meant to tear. My hands were tied. Above my head, rope biting into my wrists. My feet barely touching the dirt. My dress ripped down to my waist, so my back was naked to the morning air. For one heartbeat, I thought I was dying. Then the second strike landed, and I understood this wasn't death. This was something worse. My name is KY. I was 28 years old when 9 white men decided my body was a lesson. Caldwell Plantation, Mississippi, March of 1857. I didn't know then that this moment would divide my life cleanly in two. Before the post, after the post. Everything before feels distant now. Like a story I once overheard and forgot the ending to. Caldwell sat 15 miles south of Vicksburg. In soil so dark, it stained your hands black just from touching it. 5,000 acres of cotton, stretched flat and endless, worked by 300 of us who woke before dawn and went to sleep after dark. The master called it his operation. We called it the place where time went to die. The big house rose in the middle like it didn't belong to the land it stole from. White brick, tall columns, balconies wide enough to hold parties, while we bled in the fields. Music drifted from its windows in the afternoons. A piano. I never saw it, but I heard it. Soft notes floating over rows of cotton like mockery. We lived in the quarters, cabins packed tight together, 6 or 8 bodies to a room. Walls thin enough that grief had no privacy. You learned everyone's cries, babies, women, men trying not to make noise. I was born there. My mother Iona died when I was 12, giving birth to a child that never breathed. My father Samuel was sold when I was 8 to cover a gambling debt. After that, the world narrowed. No parents, no siblings, just survival. I learned early how not to be seen. How to move fast enough to avoid attention. How to keep my ears down and my mouth shut. During planting and harvest, I worked the fields. In winter, I worked the kitchens. I learned which white spaces were safe and which would swallow you whole if you lingered. I refused every pairing the master suggested. I'd seen too many people love someone just long enough to lose them. Love was a liability. Solitude was safer. But my mother left me something besides fear. Before she died, she taught me things quietly, when no one was listening. Roots, bark, what plants could heal and which could stop a body cold. She taught me signs, when storms were coming, when sickness was near, when death was already in the room. White folks called it voodoo. Said it like a joke, like a threat. To us it was knowledge, old knowledge. The kind you hold on to when everything else is taken. The overseers at Caldwell were 9 men who believed fear was the same thing as order. They weren't rich planters. They were poor white men given power and told it made them better than us. They carried whips like extensions of their arms. Jackson Cole led them. Lean, hard, eyes that lingered too long. Tobias Root laughed when people screamed. Marcus Finch counted lashes like numbers on a page. Daniel Cutter was young and eager to prove he belonged. Silas Webb drank and hit harder as the bottle emptied. Luther Crane quoted scripture while he swung. Nathaniel Bass went after children. Raymond Pike never forgot a slight. Elijah Stone sang while he worked. Songs that made your skin crawl. For 28 years I stayed out of their way. That was my skill. Then came March 2nd, a Monday, the kind of morning that looks gentle if you don't know better. We were turning soil, preparing for planting. 200 of us bent forward, with hoes. I noticed Emmy before I noticed him, 12 years old, too small for the tool they'd given her. Her hands shook as she tried to keep up. Tears ran down her face without sound. She knew better than to cry out loud. Nathaniel Bass noticed anyway. He always did. He crossed the field fast, anger already written across his face like it had been waiting for an excuse. He grabbed her by the hair and yanked her up so her feet left the ground. She screamed. The sound cut through everything. He slapped her hard enough that the crack echoed. Something broke inside me before I had time to think. I dropped my hoe and moved. I didn't plan it. I didn't weigh the risk. My body reacted before fear could stop it. I heard my own voice like it belonged to someone else. She's a child. Let her go. The field went silent. 200 bodies froze. Bass turned slowly. Surprise slid into rage. The others were already coming. Jackson Cole arrived with his whip loose in his hand, eyes bright like he'd been waiting for this. He asked Bass if I'd spoken out of turn. Bass smiled and said I had. Cole looked at me and nodded once. Strip her. Tie her to the post. Everyone needs to see. They dragged me across the dirt. The post stood in the center of the field, dark with old blood. They tore my dress down and tied my wrists high. I could hear laughter behind me. Whips uncoiling. Cole announced it like a sermon. 9 of us. 9 lashes each. 81 reasons to remember your place. The first lash split me open. The second erased the ground beneath my feet. By the 10th, I couldn't breathe right. By the 20th, I stopped screaming because there was nothing left to come out. Pain became everything. Time broke into pieces. I counted the men instead of the strikes. Learned their rhythms, their smells, whiskey, sweat, leather, finch precise, cutter wild, web panting, crane praying, bass giggling, pike silent, stone singing. When the 81st lash fell, my body gave up. They cut me down and left me in the dirt. 2 women carried me to the sick cabin. Old Moses cleaned my wounds with hands that shook. I lay on my stomach for 3 days, fever burning. Through me, my back a ruin I couldn't see. In the fever my mother came to me. Not as a ghost, as a memory. She didn't tell me what to do. She just reminded me that power doesn't disappear when it's ignored. When the fever broke, I didn't feel strong. I felt empty. But something cold had settled in me. Something patient. I didn't know what it wanted yet. I only knew this. They had marked me. And marks don't vanish just because the world moves on. For 3 days after they cut me down, I couldn't tell if I was awake or dying. Pain flattened everything into the same dull raw. I lay face down on the cot in the sick cabin, with my cheek pressed into a pillow that smelled like blood and old sweat, listening to my own breathing and wondering if it would stop on its own. Old Moses changed my bandages morning and night. He didn't talk much while he worked. When he peeled cloth from my back, it pulled and tore and stuck again, and I bit down on the edge of the pillow until my jaw ached worse than my skin. He cleaned the wounds with water boiled dark from bark and leaves, packed them with paste that burned at first then cooled, wrapped me tight and told me not to move. You live, he said once. Like he was surprised by it. Barely. Fever came and went in waves. Sometimes I thought I heard the piano from the big house drifting through the cabin walls. Sometimes I heard Emmy crying my name. Sometimes I heard nothing at all, and that scared me more than the pain. On the 4th day, the heat broke. I woke soaked in sweat, my body shaking. My head clear enough to remember everything that had happened. That was worse. Pain you can survive. Memory sits with you. Moses helped me sit up just long enough to drink water. My hands shook so badly I spilled most of it. When he left, I lay there staring at the wall, counting my breaths, trying to feel like a person again. I didn't think about revenge. Not yet. That came later. At first there was only humiliation. The knowledge that my body had been used as a message. That 200 people had been forced to watch me torn apart. That the men who did it would sleep that night with full bellies and working legs. I felt small in a way I hadn't since I was a child watching my father get chained and led away. I told myself I should have kept my mouth shut. I told myself Emmy wasn't worth it. That was the lawyer needed to survive the next hour. On the 5th day, people started coming quietly. Sarah brought broth from the kitchen. Ruth brought clean cloth. Amy came at dusk and stood just inside the door, like she wasn't sure she was allowed to be there. Her face was still bruised yellow and purple. She wouldn't look at my back. She whispered thank you like it was a sin. I told her not to thank me. I told her to be careful. When she left, I cried into the pillow until my chest hurt. A week passed. Then another. My back healed badly. Skin pulled tight in some places, rose thick and ropey in others. Every movement felt like tearing open something that hadn't finished closing. Moses let me see it once, holding up a piece of metal polished enough to catch my reflection. I twisted as far as I could and saw a map of damage that didn't look like it belonged to a human body. Lines crossing lines, raised ridges like cords under my skin. I didn't recognize myself. Good, I thought, and surprised myself by thinking, it's good, because if I could still recognize that body, maybe this would break me. They moved me back to work in early April, not to the fields but to the kitchens. Master Caldwell didn't like reminders. Visitors didn't like reminders. I washed dishes and carried trays and kept my head down while my back screamed under my dress. I moved slow and careful, afraid of tearing something open that wouldn't close again. The overseers watched me differently now, some with satisfaction, some with unease. Jackson Cole barely looked at me at all. That bothered me more than his attention ever had. At night I lay on my cot, listening to the quarters breathe around me. People talked quieter when I was near. Some avoided me like trouble was contagious. Others brought me scraps and whispers. I heard my name pass from mouth to mouth with something new attached to it. Fear, respect, curiosity. I didn't answer questions. I didn't tell stories. I didn't promise anything. Inside me, something was settling, not anger. Anger burns fast and leaves you empty. This was heavier, slower. It sat in my chest and waited. One evening, as Moses rewrapped my back, he said they went too far. I asked who. He said all of them. I asked if that mattered. He didn't answer right away. Finally he said some things change when a line is crossed. I asked him what happens then. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Then you remember who you are, he said. That night I dreamed of my mother standing at the edge of the woods, watching me. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. When I woke, my hands were clenched, so tight my nails had cut into my palms. I went back to work the next morning and began to pay attention. I watched how the overseers moved, where they set things down, what they touched without thinking. I didn't tell myself why I was watching. I told myself it was habit, survival. But my eyes kept finding the same men, 9 of them. I learned Jackson Cole hung his hat in the same place every time he came to the big house. I learned Tobias roots threw his dirty clothes into the same basket without looking. I learned Marcus Finch treated his ledger like a holy book and left it lying open when he was distracted. I learned Daniel Cutter kept his grooming kit close, like a boy proud of a new toy. I learned Silas Webb drank until he forgot where he was and passed out where he fell. I learned Luther Crane never let his Bible out of arm's reach. I learned Nathaniel Bass bled easy and cursed loud when he did. I learned Raymond Pike shaved every morning like it was a ritual. I learned Elijah Stone spat in the same patch of dirt every day. I told myself these were useless details. I told myself I was just noticing things because I had nothing else to do. But at night, lying on my stomach, staring into the dark, my mind replayed them, over and over. Like pieces of something I hadn't named yet. One afternoon Emmy slipped me a biscuit wrapped in cloth. She asked if my back would ever heal. I told her it would heal wrong. She asked if that meant it would always hurt. I said yes. She nodded like she'd expected that. Before she left, she asked if I was scared. I opened my mouth to lie. The truth came out instead. Yes. Of what? She asked. I thought about it. Of being hurt again. Of doing nothing. of living with this and letting it mean nothing. That night I went to the creek alone and stood there listening to the water move over stones. I remembered my mother's hands guiding mine when I was a girl, showing me how to feel for the right route, how to ask before taking. She had told me once that some knowledge sleeps until it's needed. Standing there, my back aching, the scars pulling tight with every breath, I understood what she meant. I wasn't planning yet. Not fully, but something in me had woken up. It wasn't a voice telling me what would happen. It was a pressure, like there before a storm, heavy and unavoidable. They had taken something from me that couldn't be given back. I didn't know what I would take in return. I only knew this wasn't finished. Not for me, not for them. I didn't call it revenge. I never used that word. Revenge sounds loud, reckless, emotional. What I was doing felt quieter than that, colder. Like stepping into deep water, knowing you won't feel the bottom again once you move forward. After the whipping, after the fever, after my back healed wrong and tight and ugly, something inside me stayed awake even when my body slept. I stopped dreaming the way I used to. No scattered images, no voices, just darkness and the sound of my own breathing, slow and controlled, like I was practicing for something. I still worked every day. I still bowed my head. I still followed orders, but my attention had shifted. I watched hands. I watched habits. I watched what men touched without thinking. People believe power is loud. It isn't. Power is routine. Jackson Cole hung his hat in the same place every time because he believed nothing would ever change. Tobias Root wiped blood from his knuckles like it was dirt. Marcus Finch trusted paper more than memory. Daniel Cutter admired himself too much to imagine consequence. Silas Webb drank himself into softness. Luther Crane believed God was on his side, and that belief made him careless. Nathaniel Bass treated children like objects. Raymond Pike shaved as if cleanliness could erase cruelty. Elijah Stone sang because silence scared him. I learned them the way you learn a map you're going to cross alone at night. Slowly, carefully. I told myself I was only watching because being invisible requires attention. That was the lie I used until it stopped working. The first thing I took was hair. I didn't plan it. Jackson Cole removed his hat in the hall of the big house and hung it on the peg like always. I was dusting. The knife was already in my apron because knives were always in my apron. My fingers moved before my heart reacted. A small tug, a few strands, grey and black. Coarse. I wrapped them without looking and kept dusting. My legs nearly gave out when he walked past me minutes later, his shoulder brushing mine. He didn't notice. That was worse than if he had. That night I sat on my cot holding the cloth with his hair inside and waited for something to happen. Fear, guilt, a sign. Nothing did. The world stayed exactly the same. That scared me more than thunder would have, because it meant this wasn't a line the world cared about. It was only a line inside me. Once crossed, there was no alarm, no warning bell, just quiet. Tobias Root came next. Blood on his cuff from a man he'd struck too hard. He laughed about it while he stripped off his shirt. I volunteered for laundry, and no one questioned me because no one ever questioned why a black woman did more work. I cut the bloodied fabric free and folded it small. Blood carries weight. It felt warm even after it wasn't. I washed the shirt clean and returned it white enough to satisfy him. My hands shook for an hour afterward. Marcus Finch was more difficult. He paid attention, but he also believed order protected him. He left his ledger open on the dining table while the family ate, his numbers neat and confident. I waited for laughter to rise, then tore a corner from a page he'd touched so often it was darkened by his skin. Paper remembers hands. Daniel Cutter's grooming kit was almost insulting in how easy it was. Nail clippings sitting there. Like they were nothing. Like pieces of him, meant to be thrown away. Silas Webb passed out drunk in the barn, drool on his chin, coat half open. I cut a button from his jacket and left him breathing heavy in the hay. Luther Crane nearly caught me. His Bible lay open, ribbon marking a verse he'd quoted earlier while striking a man. I pulled a single thread free. He turned to fast. His eyes locked on me. I froze. If he had spoken, if he had questioned me, I don't know what I would have done. He looked at my face, then at my back, then away. He decided I wasn't worth the effort. That decision cost him more than he knew. Nathaniel Bass bled like it was nothing. He cursed the equipment, cursed the men around him, cursed God. He threw the blood-soaked rag aside like it was trash. I retrieved it after dark. I didn't feel anything when I touched it. That disturbed me. Raymond Pike shaved every morning with care, like it was the one thing he controlled. I watched him rinse his razor in a bowl. When he left, I poured the water into a bottle. Elijah Stone spat everywhere. His mouth marked the earth. I collected dirt from where he favored. By the time I finished, 9 men existed in my cabin, in pieces, wrapped, hidden, waiting. That was when the fear arrived. Not fear of being caught, fear of myself. I sat on my cot with the items laid out in front of me and understood that this wasn't preparation anymore. This was commitment. Once you gather this much of someone, you don't pretend it means nothing. I thought about throwing it all into the river. The thought didn't stay. It slid away like oil on water. I went to Isaac Nex, the blacksmith, understood. Before I finished asking, his eyes dropped to my back. He didn't need names. He told me about his daughter, 14, taken, broken, gone. He forged 9 needles from iron meant for nails, tempered them while singing songs older than English. When he handed them to me, they were heavy with more than metal. I carried them like they might burn through my dress. I gathered clay from the riverbank, digging until my fingers hit red earth. I gathered herbs with care, speaking softly, asking permission. Slippery elm, Solomon's seal, John the Conqueror. Grave dirt from a man beaten to death years ago. Sarah gave me black thread she'd spun herself. She didn't ask questions. She looked at me like she already knew the answers and accepted them. April 24th. I closed my door, hung a blanket over the window, lit a candle. The cabin felt smaller than it ever had. I kneaded clay until my hands ached, working out air bubbles, folding intention into the motion even though I didn't call it that yet. I divided it into 9 portions and shaped bodies. Rough, human enough, not art, tools. I pressed Jackson Cole's hair into the head, marked the spine, wrapped the body in black thread tight enough to bind. Tobias Roots, blood went deeper. Marcus Finch's paper, Daniel Cutter's nails, Silas Webb's button, Luther Crane's thread, Nathaniel Bass's blood-soaked cloth, Raymond Pike's shaving water painted onto the face, Elijah Stone's dirt pressed into the mouth. By the time I finished, my hands were numb and my back burned like it always did. The dolls sat on the table and the air felt wrong, thick, heavy, like it does before a storm breaks. I left them to harden. I waited. April 29th, dark moon. I swept the floor clean and drew a circle with salt and grave dirt. I placed 3 candles, white, black, red. I poured rum onto the earth. I didn't shout. I didn't dance. I spoke the names my mother taught me like I was speaking to someone standing just out of sight. The flames flickered together. My heart pounded so hard I thought it would give me away. I picked up the first needle and held it in the flame. My hand shook. For the first time since the whipping, I thought maybe this was wrong, that this would damn me, that I was crossing into something I couldn't survive. Then I remembered the post, the sound of leather, the way my body had been turned into a lesson. My hand steadied. I pressed the needle into Jackson Cole's doll at the lower spine. The clay gave way like it was meant to. A shock ran through me, cold and sharp, like touching a live wire. I gasped. I felt something pull, tight and real. I didn't understand it. I didn't need to. I moved on. 9 needles, 9 spines, each one bringing that same cold pull. By the time the last needle went in, the candles burned low and the cabin felt crowded. Watched. I packed the dolls into a wooden box and hid it beneath my cot. I cleaned the space until it looked like nothing had happened. At dawn, I went to work. I didn't know what would happen next. I only knew that something had been done and it would not be undone easily. I thought once it was done I would feel relief. That was another lie I didn't know I was telling myself. What came instead was a pressure in my chest that made breathing feel deliberate, like every inhale had to be chosen. I went back to the quarters before dawn. My legs steady only because fear kept them locked. I lay on my cot staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of other bodies sleeping, coughing, turning, dreaming. The box beneath my cot felt heavier than it should have. I could feel it there without touching it. Like a weight pressing up through the boards into my spine. My back ached worse than usual. A deep tight pain that crawled along the scars and wrapped around my ribs. I told myself it was just the way healing went. I told myself it meant nothing. My heart didn't believe me. I drifted in and out of shallow sleep, each time waking with the same thought clawing at me. What if nothing happens? What if something happens to me instead? Morning came like it always did, indifferent and early. I got up slowly, washed my face, pulled my dress down carefully so the fabric wouldn't catch on the ridges of scar tissue, and went to work. Every sound felt sharper. Every footstep behind me made my shoulders tense. I expected shouting, whistles, the crack of a whip. Nothing came. The plantation woke the way it always did. Orders barked, bells rung, men cursed. Women moved, children dragged their feet. I worked in the kitchen with my head down and my hands busy, listening without looking. Jackson Cole hadn't arrived yet. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes he came late. Tobias Root shouted at someone in the yard. His voice sounded the same. I caught myself staring at my hands, half expecting them to be shaking. They weren't. That disturbed me. As the morning stretched on, my fear shifted. It turned inward, tight and coiled. Had I imagined the pull when the needles went in? Had I only wanted to feel something? Was I becoming the kind of person who believed stories because reality wasn't enough? I told myself again that nothing had changed. That whatever I had done was just clay and iron and foolish hope. That afternoon my back burned so badly I had to step outside and lean against the wall. Sweat soaked through my dress. The scars felt swollen, alive, like they were remembering something my mind didn't want to name. I pressed my palm flat against the wall and counted my breaths until the world stopped tilting. When I went back inside, I heard shouting from the direction of the overseer's cabins, not the usual sharp commands. This was panic. High, broken. I froze with a tray in my hands. Someone ran past the kitchen window. Then another. A woman screamed. My heart kicked hard enough that for a moment I thought I might faint. I set the tray down carefully, and walked to the door like I had all the time in the world. I didn't run. Running draws eyes. Outside, people were gathering at a distance, pretending to work while watching everything. Whispers moved faster than bodies. Jackson Cole didn't come out of his cabin that morning. He didn't come out the next. Someone said he'd fallen. Someone said he was sick. Someone said his legs wouldn't move. I stood there listening, my face blank, my stomach cold and hollow. My first thought wasn't triumph. It was terror, a sharp, breath-stealing terror that made my vision narrow. I went back to my cabin as soon as I could and dropped to my knees, pulling up the loose floorboard with fingers that finally shook. I touched the box. It was still there. The dolls lay where I'd placed them. The needles hadn't moved. I didn't touch them longer than a second. I closed the floor and sat back on my heels, breathing hard, my back screaming as if in warning. I told myself this was coincidence. Men fall ill. Men are injured. This didn't mean anything yet. That night I didn't sleep at all. I lay rigid on my cot, listening to every sound. When morning came, Tobias Root didn't come out of his cabin either. By noon, the truth was no longer whisper. It was shouting. Root had collapsed. His legs wouldn't hold him. He dragged himself back to bed with his arms, screaming for help. Dr. Pritchard was summoned. I watched from the kitchen window as he went in and out, his face tightening with confusion. When he left, his mouth was a hard line. He didn't look like a man who understood what he'd seen. That was when the fear turned into something else. Not relief, not satisfaction. Responsibility. Heavy and crushing. I went back to my cabin and checked the box again. Still untouched. Still quiet. My hands hovered over the dolls and pulled back. I didn't know what touching them again would mean. That night Marcus Finch failed to appear. The day after, Daniel Cutter. Each morning brought a new name. Each afternoon brought more panic. Men spoke in low voices. White women cried openly. Orders broke down. Work slowed. Dr. Pritchard examined them all and found nothing he could explain. Same condition. Same results. Legs useless. Sensation intact. No injury. No fever. No poison. I listened to it all like it was happening to someone else. Inside. Something tightened with every report. I stopped checking the box. I knew what was inside. I knew the needles hadn't moved. I began to feel watched even when I was alone. Not by spirits, by consequence. Every time someone said witchcraft out loud, my stomach dropped. Every time someone laughed at the idea, my skin prickled. I realized then that this wasn't a moment. It was a chain. And I was standing in the middle of it, unable to step out without pulling everything down with me. I started to understand what my mother had meant when she said some knowledge doesn't ask permission. It just waits for a wound deep enough to open the door. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't praying. I was enduring. Each night I lay awake listening to my own heartbeat, wondering how long before someone connected the dots I had tried so hard not to draw. I had crossed the line I'd pretended not to see. Whatever came next would not ask whether I was ready. I stopped thinking of them as men after the fifth one fell, not because I hated them less or more, but because hatred requires distance and I was too close to what was happening. I could feel it in my body before I heard it in words. Each morning I woke with my back pulled tight like wire, the scars burning, as if something underneath them was being stretched. I learned to read the day by the way my chest felt when I opened my eyes. If the air felt heavy, if breathing took effort, someone was going to fall. Silas Webb was the fifth. He woke late, cursing his head, trying to swing his legs out of bed, like he'd done 1,000 mornings before. They didn't move. At first he laughed. A loud, ugly laugh that turned into panic when he tried again. He slapped his thighs, hard enough to leave marks, as if they belonged to someone else. When his wife screamed, the sound cut through the quarters and made my stomach drop. I was in the kitchen when word reached us. I kept washing. My hands moved, on their own, inside. Something went cold. That afternoon I heard him crying. Not shouting, crying. The kind of crying grown men do when they've exhausted every lie they've told themselves. Luther Crane followed the next morning. He woke on his knees beside his bed because he tried to stand and collapsed forward. He prayed out loud while the doctor examined him, sweat pouring down his face, his voice shaking as he searched scripture for something that would explain why God had chosen him. He kept asking what sin he was being punished for. No one answered. Nathaniel Bass was seventh. He screamed witchcraft the moment he realized his legs were useless. He screamed my people's words like curses in his own mouth, accused everyone within reach, demanded someone fetch a rope or a knife or anything he could use to end it. White men laughed at him at first, told him to stop talking foolishness. That laughter died when they saw his legs didn't respond to pain, didn't respond to orders, didn't respond at all. Raymond Pike went down next. He was quieter. His Rage turned inward, sharp and focused. He accused his own son, accused old enemies, accused men long dead. His hands shook so badly he couldn't even strike the wall. Elijah Stone was last, the singer, the one who made music while flesh split open. He tried to sing when he woke and couldn't move. He forced the melody out through clenched teeth, his voice cracking, his breath coming short. Halfway through the song he stopped and stared at the ceiling like he'd finally understood something too late. 9 days. I counted them without meaning to. Each day tightened the coil around my chest. The plantation turned into something unrecognizable. Orders came late or not at all. Overseers argued openly. Field hands stood waiting because no one knew whose word mattered anymore. Master Caldwell paced the porch like a man trapped in his own house. Doctors arrived in waves, their boots muddy, their bags heavy with instruments that didn't help. They tested reflexes. They stabbed skin with needles. They burned flesh to see if nerves still worked. They argued in low voices and then fell silent when the pattern became impossible to ignore. Same paralysis, same place, same result, no explanation. I watched it all from the edges. I listened without looking. My name passed through mouths I never heard speak it before. Sometimes with fear, sometimes with something close to respect, sometimes with accusation whispered, so softly it felt like breath on my neck. Old Moses told me people were asking questions they didn't want answered. I told him not to answer for me. That night I dreamed of the whipping post again, but this time I was the one standing behind it, watching, unable to move, my legs dead beneath me. I woke choking on air, my heart racing, convinced the dolls were calling me. I didn't check the box. I didn't need to. I knew what was inside. By the 10th day, the 9 men were moved into a converted barn, turned into a hospital in desperation. I heard their cries at night, muffled by distance but unmistakable. I heard the sounds of bodies that no longer obeyed, of men forced to ask for help, to piss, to turn over, to be fed. Their wives learned new voices then, pleading voices, angry voices, exhausted voices, power stripped from them day by day, not in spectacle, but in routine. That was the part that made it unbearable, not the fall, the staying fallen. Sheriff Marston arrived when rumors reached Vicksburg. He came with deputies and questions and the confidence of a man who believed everything had a cause he could put a name to. He questioned everyone, threatened punishment, promised protection, found nothing. When he came to me, I felt the air tighten around us. He knew my name. He knew my scars. He knew the timing. He asked me about medicine, about herbs, about voodoo. I told him the truth shaped like a lie. I knew nothing. He ordered my cabin searched. I stood there while men tore through my life, my heart pounding so loud I was sure it would betray me. They missed the loose floorboard. They always miss what they don't believe exists. When he left, he looked disappointed, like a hunter denied blood. Master Caldwell didn't wait for proof. He didn't need it. He needed the problem to move somewhere else. Early June, he told me I was being sold to Willow Creek Plantation in Georgia. 2 weeks. I nodded. I didn't beg. That night the 9 men sent word. Money pulled together, $900. They wanted me to undo it. They didn't say how. They didn't ask why. They believed enough to negotiate. Master Caldwell delivered the message himself. He asked me if I'd done it. I asked him why I would give them back their legs. He didn't answer. I refused the money. The night before I was marched away in chains. I heard one of them screaming in the barn. Not words, just sound. Raw and animal. I lay on my cot staring into the dark, my back aching, my body exhausted, and understood something that made my stomach twist. This wasn't about justice anymore. Justice ends. This was consequence. And consequence doesn't ask permission. When they chained me and started the march toward Georgia, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the work holding, stretching beyond distance, beyond my body. Whatever I had set loose was walking its own path now, and there was no calling it home. I didn't know what mercy looked like until I watched men who never showed any beg for it with their eyes. The barn that became their hospital smelled like sour sweat, old straw, and panic that never aired out. Sometimes I was sent past it with trays because the big house wanted to look civilized when doctors visited, and sometimes I went past it, simply because my feet kept finding the path, like some part of me needed proof that this was real. The first time I heard Jackson Cole trying to order his own legs to move, I stopped in the shadow of the doorway and felt my mouth go dry. He wasn't screaming at anyone. He was arguing with his body. He slapped his thighs, then the bed frame, then grabbed his own knees and tried to lift them like they were sacks of flour. His arms trembled with effort. His face was wet, not from heat, but from something he didn't understand. He saw me, and his expression changed so fast it made my stomach twist. Not rage, not hunger. Recognition. Like a man realizing the world had finally noticed him the way he'd always noticed others. Tobias Root's wife sat beside his cot with a cloth in her hand, wiping drool from his mouth like he was an infant. She looked up at me with eyes that hated me for being able to stand, then hated herself for needing someone like me to carry water. Tobias tried to laugh when I passed, tried to make it a joke. But the laugh caught in his throat and turned into a choking sound that made his wife flinch. Marcus Finch kept asking for his ledger. He wanted numbers. He wanted something he could count, something that could make sense of this. When the doctor told him there was nothing to record, no injury to measure, Finch stared at his own legs with a blank face that scared me more than screaming would have. Daniel Cutter was the worst kind of helpless, because he was young enough to still believe someone would fix him if he begged right. He promised money to anyone who could cure him. He promised land. Promised God. Promised he would be good. Like goodness was a bargain he could finally afford. Silas Webb sweated and shook as drink left his system and Tara moved in to fill the space. He blamed whiskey. Then he blamed the water. Then he blamed every black body he saw. His eyes rolling toward us with hatred, because hatred was the only muscle he still knew how to flex. Luther Crane kept praying out loud, not softly like a man speaking to God, but loudly like a man trying to shout God into agreeing with him. The verses he chose were always about judgment when he was healthy. Now he clung to verses about deliverance. He didn't see the irony. Or he did and couldn't bear it. Nathaniel Bass begged to be strapped upright because lying flat made him feel like he was already in a coffin. He screamed for a whip he could hold, screamed for a child to punish, screamed for anything that would make him feel like himself again. The screaming stopped after the third week, and that silence felt like a door closing. Raymond Pike's son came to the barn once and stood at the foot of the cot looking down at his father with a face that didn't match grief. It was the same face I'd seen on men in the quarters when they realized someone else's suffering might finally give them a breath of relief. Elijah Stone stared at the rafters most of the time. He didn't sing. He didn't ask questions. He watched dust drift through sunbeams like he was counting something no one else could see. One afternoon, when I passed close enough to hear, he whispered, "I can feel my legs," and then, "I can't reach them." That sentence sat in my chest all day. The doctors did things that made my skin crawl. They pinched skin hard enough to bruise. They pressed hot metal to feet and watched for a flinch. They struck knees with small hammers and frowned when nothing jumped. Dr. Pritchard talked in circles, sweating through his collar, explaining to Master Caldwell that sensation was intact. Circulation was intact. The spine appeared uninjured. One of the visiting doctors from New Orleans used the word mystery and Master Caldwell's face tightened like he'd been insulted. Mystery meant lack of control, and lack of control was the one thing he couldn't tolerate. The white community started treating the barn like a plague house. Some wouldn't step near it. Some crossed themselves when they passed. Some whispered that God was punishing cruelty, then caught themselves because acknowledging that would mean acknowledging what cruelty was. But inside the quarters, the story moved like fire. It didn't sound like laughter. It sounded like breath finally released after years of holding it. People didn't celebrate openly because celebration draws blood. But at night, when the dark covered us, I heard murmurs, low and careful, like prayers. I heard people say the word justice, the way you say a name you've been afraid to speak. That frightened me too, because hope makes people careless, and carelessness gets bodies sold, beaten, buried. I kept my face still. I didn't take credit. I didn't deny anything beyond what I had to. Inside, I felt split. One part of me wanted to run back to my cabin, rip up the floorboard, pull the needles out, end it before it grew bigger than I could contain. Another part of me refused, not out of cruelty, but out of memory. The post, the air, the sound, the way no one could stop it once it started. That part of me said, this is what they taught you, that consequences don't pause because someone regrets them. Master Caldwell tried to regain control the only way he knew how. He brought in new overseers, men from neighboring plantations, men who arrived with confident boots and whips on their belts. Within a week those men were jumpy, looking over their shoulders, watching black hands like they expected poison in every cup and knives in every pocket. They walked wider circles around the quarters. They kept their hats on indoors. They wouldn't drink water offered by enslaved women. Fear makes cowards of everyone. That fear spread, thin and constant, and it made the plantation more dangerous, not less, because frightened men strike faster. The sheriff's visit didn't calm anything. It sharpened it. After Marston left, people began to test me with their eyes. White folks glanced at my hands like hands themselves were evidence. Enslaved people watched me the way you watch the river when you're deciding whether to cross. Old Moses warned me quietly that power draws attention even when you try to hide it. I asked him what he thought power was. He looked at my back and said, sometimes it's just the moment you stop believing you deserve what they do to you. When Master Caldwell told me I'd be sold, his voice tried to sound casual, like it was business. But I saw the tremor in his jaw. He didn't want me on his land anymore. He didn't want my presence to be a reminder that bodies can answer back. The offer from the 9 men came after that. Desperate and humiliating, they pulled money like they were buying their way out of a nightmare. They didn't send apologies, they sent coins. That told me everything I needed to know. On my last night at Caldwell, the barn was quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just exhausted. I heard one of the wives sobbing until her voice broke. I heard chamber pots being emptied. I heard a man whispering, please, like the word was new on his tongue. I lay on my cot staring into the dark, my back aching, my throat dry, and felt the weight of what I had done settle fully onto me. Not pride, not satisfaction, weight. Like carrying a stone you can't put down without being crushed by it. When dawn came and chains closed around my wrists for the march to Georgia, I didn't look back because looking back would have been a kind of permission to doubt. And doubt was the only thing that could break me now. I stepped forward with my face blank and my heart pounding, listening to the plantation wake behind me, listening for the crack of leather that didn't come, and understanding, with a clarity that felt almost unbearable, that I had changed the shape of their days the way they'd changed the shape of my skin, and neither of us would ever return to what we were before. I didn't know how long the work would hold once I left Mississippi, and that ignorance followed me like a shadow I couldn't shake no matter how far the road stretched. The chain gang moved slow, iron-biting skin, dust rising with every step, the sun pressing down like it meant to flatten us into the ground. I expected distance to loosen whatever had tied itself inside me. Expected the pull to thin and fade the way pain sometimes does when you walk long enough. It didn't. It stayed with me, not sharp anymore, not loud, but constant, a weight behind my sternum that made each breath feel deliberate, chosen. Willow Creek Plantation outside Macon looked smaller than Caldwell, less grand, but the cruelty. There wore a quieter face that cut just as deep. Different overseers, different rules, same sounds. Whips still cracked. Orders still came quick and thoughtless. Bodies still learned the same lessons. They put me in the kitchens first, then the fields when they decided my back could take it. It could. It always could. Bodies remember, nights were the worst. I lay awake listening to insects sing and men snore and women cry into cloth, and I waited for something to snap, for some invisible cord to break. It never did. News reached me in fragments carried by traders, by preachers, by soldiers who spoke too freely when they thought no one worth listening was nearby. I didn't ask. I didn't lean in. I let the names come to me the way rain does. Whether you want it or not, Jackson Cole remained alive longer than any of them expected, his mind sharp, his legs useless, his temper rotting into something small and poisonous. I heard he demanded to be carried onto the porch each morning, so he could watch work he could no longer control, his eyes tracking bodies like they were property still within reach. Tobias Root developed sores that never closed, wounds that smelled. Before you saw them, the skin breaking down, because blood no longer moved the way it should, because stillness eats flesh from the inside out. His wife learned the sound of flies gathering. Marcus Finch lasted a year before his hands began to fail, the fingers curling inward as if they were remembering numbers they could no longer write. His body folding in on itself until even his voice seemed to shrink. Daniel Cutter drank harder than before, drank like he was trying to drown something that followed him everywhere. And when his liver failed, he screamed that his legs were burning even as they lay cold and useless. His mind still convinced sensation meant movement, that pain meant power. Silas Webb tried to crawl one night, drunk and desperate, his arms straining, his face scraping the floor. And when he fell from the bed and snapped his neck, the sound carried down the hallway like a final punctuation. Luther Crane refused food, convinced God was testing him, convinced faith would be proven by endurance, and he starved himself into something thin and quiet, his prayers turning into whispers that no one answered. Nathaniel Bash tried to kill himself and failed, the shot tearing his face instead of ending him, leaving him alive and unable to speak, drool slick on his chin. Eyes wide and wild like an animal trapped in a body it couldn't escape. He lived another year like that, fed and turned and cleaned by hands he once struck without thought. Raymond Pike wasted away from infections doctors could not explain, fevers that came and went, wounds that opened without cause, his body betraying him, one small failure at a time. Elijah Stone lived the longest. That knowledge stayed with me like a held breath. He never sang again. When I heard that, something inside me loosened and hurt all at once, not relief, not triumph, but the strange ache that comes when a sound you hated disappears and leaves a silence you didn't expect to feel. Time moved the way it always does, forward and careless. The war came like a storm you could feel in the ground before you ever saw it. Boots and guns replacing whips, and ledgers, chaos tearing holes wide enough for people like me to slip through. If we were patient and careful and lucky. I waited, I listened. I learned roots and rhythms the way I always had. In the winter of '64, when orders broke down and attention scattered, I ran, not dramatic, not fast, quiet, patient. I moved at night, following the river north and then west, hiding when voices rose, freezing when branches snapped, my back aching with every mile, my lungs burning, my heart steady because panic wastes breath. You need to keep moving. I reached a place where no one knew my name and took a new one that fit better in my mouth. Kaisi. I worked as a healer because that was what my hands knew how to do without drawing too much notice. I boiled bark and leaves. I bound wounds. I listened more than I spoke. People brought me their pain and I treated it without asking where it came from. I never spoke about Mississippi. I never spoke about Caldwell. I didn't need to. The scars did that work for me when I chose to let someone see them. The raised ridges and twisted lines telling a story without my voice. Years passed, the knot in my chest loosened slowly, like something being untied one finger at a time, careful and deliberate. I aged. My hair grayed, my hands stiffened in the mornings. The world changed round me in ways I never would have imagined from the fields. Laws written and rewritten, promises made and broken, freedom declared and then narrowed by 1,000 quiet rules. I lived inside that space, neither whole nor broken, carrying the weight of what I had done the way you carry a stone you've learned to balance so it doesn't cut you anymore. When word reached me that Elijah Stone had finally died, alone and silent, I sat down on the ground where I stood and didn't get up for a long time. Not because I was relieved, because I knew what came next. Some work doesn't end when the bodies stop breathing, it waits. I waited for the right season, for the ground to be soft enough to take a shovel, for my hands to feel steady enough to finish what I'd begun. I made my way back to Mississippi quietly, older and unremarkable, a woman no one noticed twice. The land looked different and the same all at once, fields broken up, fences moved, but the river still ran the way it always had, patient and indifferent. I went to the bank where it had begun, where my fingers had first dug into red clay, and I worked the earth with my own hands until a small pit opened, my back aching, my breath measured. I placed the box inside. The dolls were dry and cracked with age, the clay brittle, the needles still buried where I'd put them, iron darkened by time. I didn't rush. I thanked what needed thanking. I spoke the words that closed doors instead of opening them, words my mother taught me that are not prayers and not commands but acknowledgements of balance restored at a cost. I burned the clay until it crumbled, until the shapes that once held men reduced to ash and fragments, and I scattered what remained into the water, watching the current take it without ceremony. The knot in my chest finally let go, not with peace, with quiet. The kind of quiet that doesn't promise anything, that doesn't forgive or forget, that simply allows you to stand without bracing for impact. I stood there listening to the river move on without me, carrying what remained away, and understood something I hadn't when I was younger and bleeding on a post. Power doesn't make you free. Survival does. And survival leaves marks you carry whether you want to or not. I walked away without looking back, my back aching the way it always would, my breath steady, carrying nothing but the weight of years and the knowledge that some lines, once crossed, don't vanish. They fade into the shape of who you become, and you live with that shape as honestly as you can, one measured step at a time.